whatever you want.
All right, you guys ready? Well, let's kick it off. I appreciate everyone coming. We're going to be talking about inflation here today. You can obviously see from the charts what we are talking about. Let's start out with the consumer price inflation. Americans are all painfully aware that we now have a 7.5% inflation rate. That's year over year from January a year ago to January this year, which is the highest rate since 1982. The highest rate of inflation in 40 years. Same thing happening in all other indices about inflation. This one just shows the producer price inflation. That's 9.7%. And you can see the skyrocketing that has taken off. It's very clearly a result of the incredible excessive overspending that is heating up the economy. Now, there are other issues. We've just gone through a pandemic, but we recovered from the pandemic. The economy is open. We do have some supply chain issues, but to think that supply chain issues in certain supply markets are causing this kind of a response is simply inaccurate. Let's put the other chart up. In just 1 year under this administration, the inflation has risen this way. Inflation continues to accelerate, and Americans face prices across the board. You can just see a sample of them here. Since the economic policies that we've seen in the last year and a half, really, it has cost families nearly 7% more to put food on the table. Energy costs have risen by 27%. The price of gas has exploded by over 40%. The bill for fuel oil to heat the family home ballooned by over 46%. Gas service to keep stoves running in your home increased by almost 24%. If you're in the market for a new car costs 12% more. A used car costs 41% more. And the list goes on. Moody's Analytics estimates that the average U.S. household is spending an additional $270 a month because of inflation. A Penn Wharton study indicates that cost for the average family in America is $3,500 more this year for the exact same consumption that they had last year. Small businesses cite inflation as the biggest challenge they face. Workers have lost purchasing power as they watch their wages erode and be eaten up. The stealth tax was exacerbated by unnecessary deficit spending last year and more reckless spending that is being pushed and pushed and pushed even today as we speak. Congress should be working to address the harmful effects of inflation and taking steps to address our ballooning debt crisis and our unsustainable mandatory spending. We've got a number of our colleagues who are going to come. I've asked them all to try to keep it to about a minute or so. And I'm going to go next to Senator Barrasso.
Well, Joe Biden is the president of high prices. And one of the defining failures of the Biden presidency is going to be inflation. We're now at a 40-year high of inflation. And interestingly enough, Joe Biden's approval rating has dropped to a historic low of only 40%. 40-year high inflation, 40% approval rating. Because people are feeling the pain, paying the price every time they go to the grocery store, every time they go to the gas pump. It's $1 a gallon more for gas now than it was when Joe Biden became president. Month after month after month, prices continue to go up. Wages aren't going up in a way they can keep up with the prices that are going up. So people are falling further and further behind, and they're feeling squeezed. It's happening to working families all across the country. The numbers are it's cost about $275 more this year, each month, $275 more each month, just to try to keep up with the standard of living that they were at a year ago. So people are having to change the way they drive, they shop, they eat, they live. People are having to tap into savings if they have savings. As a result, people's dreams are being crushed. The cost of energy is really affecting people, additionally, not just from driving, but also from heating their homes. And who gets hurt there the most? Well, people living on a fixed income, people struggling to get by. It's gotten to the point where a national poll by Harvard-Harris found that only 3 in 10 Americans approve of the way that Joe Biden is handling inflation. Only 3 in 10. That means just about every Republican, every independent, a whole lot of Democrats aren't happy with the way Joe Biden is handling inflation. And what's his suggestion? Well, he said it again yesterday in a speech. It's going back to this Build Back Better plan with higher taxes, more expenses, more debt, more government spending. That will make inflation worse. When Americans see Joe Biden speaking, they see somebody who is out of touch and in way over his head. And unfortunately, the American people are paying for this president's incompetence.
Senator Thune.
Well, the Democrats made a very noticeable pivot yesterday. I don't know if you noticed this, but starting with Senator Schumer's floor remarks, but throughout the day, all of a sudden they're starting to talk about inflation. So evidently they have looked at some polling data and realized the impact that this is having on the American people and what the American people think about their leadership as a result of that. And if you take into consideration that a year ago, the inflation rate was 1.2%, 1.2%, well within the Federal Reserve's range of 2% inflation. And now it's 7.5%. Think of that, 7.5%. In fact, that's a $3,500 additional cost to the average family in this country just in this last year. It's a $3,500 tax increase on the American families. And who does that hurt the most? It hurts lower income families, middle income families who are struggling to make ends meet. I'm glad that the Democrats are finally coming to the conclusion that this is an issue that needs to be addressed. But they missed the boat a long time ago, starting with the vote last March to increase spending by $2 trillion, which led this inflationary crisis that we're in. And their solution to it, yes, is to double down and to spend another $5 trillion, flood the zone with even more money, have more dollars chasing fewer goods, and see inflation continue to spike. So this needs to be stopped. It affects everybody. I can tell you right now, as South Dakota farmers get ready to plant, they're looking at higher seed costs, higher fertilizer costs, higher equipment costs, higher fuel costs. It affects everybody. This is a tax on every single American, paid by every single American, but experienced the most in terms of the harshest impact on those middle and lower income Americans who are struggling just to be able to pay the bills and make ends meet. And what does this mean for them? It means a pay cut. Because even though they may have gotten a pay increase last year, they have a 7.5% now increase in the cost of everything they purchase, a $3,500 tax, meaning that they are taking home less money this year than they were last year.
Senator Grassley.
Inflation is something I hear from Iowans at each one of my 99 county meetings. 13 so far this year, and I'll bet I'll hear it at 12 next week. We know now that this inflation is not transitory. They were wrong then. We know that this inflation is very persistent and probably could get worse. Hopefully not, but it could be. Iowa families, you heard Thune, they're being hit by the same $3,500 a year increases in their costs, or you can call it a tax. Iowa small businesses can't keep up with the inflation. Nobody listened to Larry Summers when January he said we'd already spent too much money by the bill we passed before Christmas 2020, and he's pleading with the Democrats not to spend the $2 trillion that they did in March, but they didn't listen. He repeated that in April. He repeated that speech again in August. He repeated it again in October. And it was finally, they listened to Manchin and Build Back Better. They didn't make it $4.5 trillion worse. They should have listened to him. We got to thank Senator Manchin to bringing some fiscal sanity to this Congress of the United States by saying he wasn't going to go along with Build Back Better. So the Fed has started to pull back about 6 months late, but they're doing it, so maybe they're doing what they can do to get it under control, even though it's late. I think the best thing that Biden could do would be to use the bully pulpit to tell Congress to spend less, like Manchin has advised his own Democrats to do, and he's led the way on that, because only the bully pulpit can bring confidence to the economy the way that the 100 members of Congress can't. Another thing he could do is undo all of the things he did to drive up gas prices. XL pipeline, shut down drilling in Alaska, offshore, on land, Gulf of Mexico drilling, state or national property, no drilling, putting impediments on fracking. All of this stuff is driving up the price of gasoline, and he could undo that very quickly. No, what do we get from the Democrats in the Congress? Just to reduce it by 18 cents by not having the federal gas tax. No, those same Democrats should be working with the House or with the White House to get these bad energy policies reversed. And can you believe the ridiculousness of the Democrat administration getting involved in saying banks shouldn't lend to energy companies? We have to have the flow of energy. That's what drives our economy.
Thank you. Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Senator Crapo. You know, this time last year, we tried to tell the Biden administration not to pour trillions of dollars into this economy. The basic fundamentals of economics have to work. A high schooler taking an economics class could figure this out, but the White House can't. This is unbelievable inflation of 40 years. When I was in high school, I worked at a grocery store when I was 15 years old, and I worked there for 5 years, on and off, part-time, through school. I noticed every item. I knew how much it cost. A gallon of milk was $1.59. You just about name an item. So I'm very conscious of the price of groceries. When I was in my grocery store at home, they were taking the prices down. I said, "What are you doing?" They said, "They're going up so fast, we're having to constantly keep somebody out here to change the pricing out." Folks, this is real. Let me translate this into real life. Mississippi is a huge timber state. We have millions of acres of timber. We call ourselves a wood basket. To harvest this timber, you have to get it to a sawmill. The log trucks that haul this timber to the sawmills, they're tractor-trailer rigs, 18-wheelers. They have to fill those tanks up every day with fuel so they can continue on. These tanks hold about 120 to 150 gallons of fuel in the tank. And by the way, they only get like 6 to 7 miles per gallon when they're loaded. Every morning, the loggers in Mississippi have to fuel those tanks up 120 gallons, and it's almost $4 a gallon. Do the math on that. Mississippians are hurting. This country is hurting because of the inflation that we're looking at. Even with the grocery prices there, 12% up. That doesn't say a whole lot. Do you think 12% is really not that much? Trust me, it is. As I used to check out groceries, and I'd get to the subtotal, and I'd add the taxes, and then I'd get to the total, and the lady would look at me and she'd say, "We'd have to put something back," because we had to match what was in her purse. So we put back some items so she could afford it. I can't imagine what that is today. I can't imagine what that is when they come in and they realize, I cannot afford this. Our families have to eat. So it is real. It is hurting families. And the president still tries to spin it as the economy is doing good. Mississippians aren't buying that. It is not doing good in Mississippi or anywhere else in the country. And I wish the president would have heeded the warnings of The Economist, and he needs to do that now, because we're hurting. It is real. These are real stories, and we can do better than this, and the American people certainly deserve better than this. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Marshall and then Senator Lankford.
The Biden tax created by Biden policies is costing hardworking American families not 100, not 200, but $275 every month. Biden policies are creating high prices and driving up the cost of living. Let me just bring this home for just a second. I have 4 children and 3 grandsons and 1 on the way here in the next month. Over the past couple weeks, son number 1 called me and said, "Dad, my utility bill has doubled this month." Son number 2 said, "Dad, I just filled up my car and gas is almost $4 a gallon." Son number 3 said, "Dad, I'm out looking for an apartment right now, but I can't even find one, and I can't afford it if I find it." And we all know that's code for Dad, send us some money if you can. Today is one of my grandson's birthday. When he was born, he had $30,000 of debt. His share of the national debt was $30,000. Today it's $100,000. And we have a president whose policies want to borrow more money, which drives up inflation. I want to turn to senior citizens just for a second. The average Social Security check in this country per month is about $1,600. And yes, there's people out there that live on a Social Security check. What is the impact of burning $275 more every month before you start buying groceries and gasoline for that widowed woman who's on a $1,600 Social Security check? This is a tax from Joe Biden. I want you everyone to stop just for a second and think what inflation is going to do to our SNAP programs, to our school lunches, to our USAID programs. Think about what inflation is doing to our Medicare budget right now. The biggest cost of health care is labor. And thanks to Joe Biden's policies and his mandates, he's driving up the cost of labor and creating artificial shortages as well. And that's why this week we're submitting a resolution to stop the declaration of emergency for COVID. It's time for Congress to end this. This declaration of emergency gives President Biden and Dr. Fauci too much power and control of our daily lives, and it feeds and fuels the inflation problem. Thank you so much. Don't throw it. We'll throw it up in the air.
Thank you. So when you get into a conversation about inflation, it gets wonky with a lot of numbers, but I hear several numbers that get thrown out pretty often, and that is, well, we have high inflation because we have low unemployment. So let me just run a couple of numbers past us to be able to keep this in context. During the Trump administration, we had record low unemployment, but the average inflation during that 4-year time period was 1.9%. When President Biden took office, January a year ago, if I can take just a year to a year, February a year ago, 1.7% inflation. Now, 7.5% inflation. From 1.7 a year ago to 7.5. Half of America has never experienced inflation like what we're experiencing right now. Half of America has no idea what really inflation looks like until the last couple of months when they go to the grocery store, they go to fill up their truck with gas, they go to actually pay their home heating oil costs, whatever it may be. They're experiencing now what inflation is and thinking, how come I can't pay my way through a month like I used to be able to pay my way through? And it's because of inflation. Now, for all of us that are old enough to remember the time under Jimmy Carter, we remember what inflation does. We remember what that actually causes across the country, and we remember how difficult it is for everybody in the country. But half of America is now learning what this means. This is an American issue based solely on the policies of this president. Why can I say that? Well, look at inflation around the rest of the world. That'd be the easy way to be able to say it. Look at inflation right now in Japan. Japan's inflation rate right now is 0.6%. 0.6% in Japan. If you go to Germany, Bloomberg has reported that they're looking at for 2022, inflation in Germany, 3.7%. Inflation for France is predicted to be 2.8% this year. For Italy, 3.8%. For Spain, 3.6%. For the United States right now, 7.5%. This is solely based on the policies that the Biden administration has put into place that has taken us from 1.7% to 7.5% in 1 year. We have got to open up our manufacturing here, open up our energy production here, stop discouraging American production, and to actually get us back on track and stop sending free money across the economy, which continues to be able to spark inflation like we're experiencing right here.
Senator Young, and then Senator Bozeman.
40 and 276. Those are really the only numbers you need to know. I'll come back to those. 7% food inflation. That hurts people on fixed incomes in particular. 40% year-on-year increase in gas prices. We're looking at $1 additionally per gallon at the pump in the state of Indiana year-on-year. Electric costs, roughly 11% increase. Once again, this hurts people on fixed incomes. This hurts manufacturing workers disproportionately. But really, the headline figures that all of you should take away is 40 and 276. 40 years. It's a 40-year high in our price inflation. And 276 an additional expenditure for regular working families. That's the average amount that Hoosier families and other American families are having to pay on account of policy decisions. These are policy decisions. This didn't happen organically. This isn't a function of economic cycles. This is government policy to spend trillions of dollars when the economy was already opening up. Now, is this a gotcha thing that you got a Republican up here and calling out a Democratic president on? No. I sat in the Oval Office with other Republican members of the United States Senate back in February, and I pleaded with the administration not to spend so much of our money on things we don't need at a time that the economy was already opening up. They didn't listen, and here we are. I've pleaded with the administration time and time again to deregulate, not to increase regulation. They, for example, proposed doubling the cost of child care and then subsidizing the doubled cost of child care. It's absolutely preposterous. And perhaps the easiest and most obvious way that we could reduce the pinch that regular Americans are feeling from price inflation is to lean into free trade. There are still things that this country needs to trade, but this administration has not even requested trade promotion authority, which allows us to sell our food and fiber, our manufactured goods, into foreign markets and to bring in those cheap things that we don't make here or don't make here at an affordable cost. But the administration, instead, they've doubled down on their tax and spend, big government agenda. My constituents are really upset. I'll continue to advocate for smart policies as opposed to these ill-advised policies because this is having a real impact on rank-and-file Americans, and it has to stop.
Thank you, Senator Bozeman, and then Senator Portman. And I remind my colleagues to be concise. We got a lot of us that want to speak.
Thank you, Mike, so much. And I guess the question is, why are so many senators here today? And it's because people are seeing their bills pile up. Everybody in this room can relate to that. It's the number one issue that I hear about as I travel Arkansas and travel throughout the country. As ranking member on the Ag Committee, I see the President's plan squeezing ag communities, the ag community in the sense of our foresters, our farmers, our ranchers, all of those individuals as their operations require more and more capital, thus attacking rural America. I don't have the big chart, but I've got a little one that I think that tells a lot. And on it you can see that fuel and oil has gone up 35%, fertilizer 34%, livestock and poultry purchases 24%, feed 21%. The list goes on and on. We've got a fire that's raging, burning through Americans' paychecks and their budgets. Let's stop pretending that pouring gas on it is the only option, which is what the administration and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle keep proposing. Instead, we should work together to come up with a plan, and you've heard several proposals today as we've talked about this, to actually get this under control so we can help Arkansans and the people of America recover. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Portman and Senator Kennedy.
So my colleagues have done a great job in talking about the most punitive tax of all. And the most punitive tax of all is high inflation that is way higher than wage growth. And that's exactly what's happening right now. Yeah, wages are going up a little bit, but not nearly as high as inflation. So people are feeling it. By the way, yesterday, the producer price index number came out. What does that mean? That's about wholesale prices, and it's about the future. And they came out at 1%, meaning roughly a 10% increase in the producer price index. That was continued bad news, because when you hear the administration say that this is transitory, this PPI number yesterday means, unfortunately, we're in for higher inflation at least for the next year. So what happened? Well, policies changed. As of February, before COVID started, we had 19 straight months in this country of wage growth of over 3%. We had historically low inflation numbers, less than 2%. Things were going well because people, again, were making more money. Wages were actually higher than inflation. So middle-income families in Ohio and around the country were feeling it. They were able to get ahead, some for the first time in a couple decades. Then the Biden administration made a decision that they were going to skew the demand and the supply, because inflation's all about too much demand and not enough supply, right? And the demand was throwing a lot of stimulus into the economy. So about a year ago, we had this conversation. The administration said they were going to spend almost $2 trillion, which they said was for COVID, right after we had spent almost $1 trillion on a bipartisan basis. But the problem was the administration's COVID proposal was not really about COVID. Most of the money had nothing to do with fighting this virus. Most of it had to do, again, with just pumping stimulus into the economy. At the same time, they were reducing the supply side. That includes on the energy front. Remember the first day in office, shutting down Keystone XL pipeline? Making it harder to produce energy in this country generally? So you had, again, increased demand, this unprecedented level of stimulus spending. It was the biggest bill, $1.9 trillion, ever passed by Congress. And you had a reduction in demand. Everybody said this was going to result in higher inflation. Not just Republicans, although we did. And we said, look, the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, nonpartisan group, has told us we're getting back to the levels of growth we had pre-COVID just in a few months. Because they said by mid-year we'd be back to a point where we'd be having economic growth comparable to what it was before COVID. And yet they felt it necessary to dump almost $2 trillion into the economy. But it wasn't just us. Secretary of the Treasury under Democratic administrations, Larry Summers, said the same thing. And by the way, he continues to say it, as do other smart economists on both sides of the aisle who look at this very simply and say, you can't just throw the stimulus in and change the policies on the supply side as well and not expect inflation to rage. And that's exactly what's happened. So the most punitive tax of all. 2 weeks ago, I filled up my pickup truck, my F-150. I paid almost $100. People can't afford that. People who commute to work, people who use their truck for their business. And I'm hearing from them, as you are, I'm sure. It's time to change policies and do it now to avoid this punitive tax continuing.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Then Senator Rick Scott, and we're getting close. Then Senator Sullivan and Senator Tim Scott.
All right, Crapo. If many Americans won the lottery tomorrow, the first thing they would do is fill up their gas tank. I'm not sure that President Biden understands that. The Biden administration claims that they are for the little gal or the little guy, but they sure don't seem to like them very much. I can't imagine a more pernicious tax than inflation. This inflation, which has characteristics of both demand pull and cost push inflation, is a direct result of President Biden's economic policies. President Biden, of course, denies that. President Biden has blamed inflation on COVID. President Biden has blamed inflation on low unemployment. President Biden has blamed inflation on greedy businesswomen and greedy businessmen. As one commentator put it, I expect President Biden next to say that inflation originated in a bat. But it didn't. It began with the economic policies of the president. What can we as members of Congress do about it? Well, we can't force the members of the Biden administration to retake Econ 101, but we can do our part by stopping spending like we were drunken sailors. Actually, we're worse than drunken sailors, because drunken sailors stop spending when they run out of money, and Congress doesn't. And we can help by changing our ways in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Rick Scott, then Senator Sullivan.
So consumer prices up 7.5% and producer prices up 9.7%. Now, in my state, it's having a devastating impact on families. I grew up in a poor family. I watched my mom struggle with inflation. When I was a kid, she would take in odd jobs. Whatever money she had, either my older brother and I would go to the store. We had to add up without a calculator exactly how much things were going to cost, or we had to do the embarrassing thing and say, oh, I don't have enough money, and say, you have to put that back on the shelf. I watched my mom struggle to buy gas, put food on the table. Now the stories I'm getting all across my state is the same thing. People are going to food banks that never went to food banks before. People are taking second and third odd jobs just to try to make ends meet. People have to pool where they live. Food's up, gas is up, rent's up. And it's all caused by bad economic policy. So if you look at inflation, what causes inflation? One, excess spending causes inflation. Number two, make it difficult for people to produce things. When you increase the permitting time, make it difficult to get a permit, say you can't drill for oil, things like that, prices go up. When you add all this regulatory attitude, when you're a business guy, and I was in business, they make it difficult to do business. You don't produce things, or you don't produce things in this country. That's exactly what the Biden administration is doing. So all across my state, people are hurting. The Biden administration has no plan. They have no plan to change. I can't see any way this is going to get better until the Biden administration and Democrats stop spending money, stop making it difficult to open and build a business, stop making it difficult to run a business. But until that time, many, many people across my state are going to get hurt.
Senator Sullivan.
Well, I think you're seeing one theme here, and it's the theme of it's the policies stupid. Just in the last couple days, you saw 4 very vulnerable Democrat senators put forward a bill to reduce the gas tax. You saw President Biden yesterday hold a press conference where he said he's going to go around the world to try and encourage countries that produce energy to produce more energy. But here's what you never hear from the Democrats, and you certainly never hear from this president. We're going to support the American energy sector. That is a policy that you've heard from every senator here almost today that would work. And instead, the policies inside of a year that we have seen with this administration are now becoming legendary on how anti-American energy they are. They're stopping the production and making it harder to produce American energy while at the same time begging OPEC to produce more. We're importing twice as much oil from Russia today than we were at the end of the Trump administration. They are stopping and killing energy infrastructure like Keystone XL. They are going to financial institutions in America, encouraging them not to invest in American energy. And they're putting forward executive branch and other officials like the new Fed nominee, Ms. Raskin, who I'm going to meet with right after this press conference, who have said that the Fed's job should be to choke off capital to the American energy sector. These are the policies and the predictable result. Higher energy prices on working families, pink slips for American energy workers, I'm seeing that in Alaska, and empowering our adversaries like Putin. This is national security suicide in terms of American energy policies. Winston Churchill once said, "To build may have to be the slow and laborious task of years. To destroy can be the thoughtless act of a single day." This administration inherited a long-term bipartisan goal that we have been seeking as Americans for decades: American energy independence. And what they've done in a single day, is they've sought to destroy that. It makes no sense for American people, for inflation, for national security, and they really need to get their boot off the neck of American energy producers. That will help dramatically solve these inflation problems.
Clean up.
Thank you, Senator. Let me just say what Senator Portman was too kind to say about the impact on inflation around our country, and specifically in places like Ohio and South Carolina and so many other states around the country. In 1982, the inflation rate this month was 7.5%. If you want to know who's going to win the Super Bowl, all you got to do is look back at 1982 and realize that in 2022, 40 years later, the inflation rate is 7.5%. The last time the Bengals lost a Super Bowl, inflation was 7.5%. Some thought it was because of the Rams receiver, Mr. Cup. Others thought it was because of the defensive player, Mr. Donald. The truth of the matter is that the impact of inflation even cost the Bengals the Super Bowl. You agree?
I totally agree.
I thought you would, sir. I thought you would. Yes, exactly. To a more serious point, I was talking to Mom, Michelle, over the weekend. Her gas prices are up in South Carolina nearly 50% over the last 12 months. Her pay is up 4%, 10 times more expensive for gas for a mom with 2 kids. I spoke with Braun, a newlywed, looking forward to the promise of the American dream, trying to find the down payment for a home. But the pay that he is seeing is going down based on the spending power of his dollars going down precipitously. We can talk about the transitory nature of inflation. We could talk about the growth or the lack thereof of our GDP. But the truth of the matter is that the Democrats and Mr. Biden, President Biden, continue to ask the American people to believe what he is saying as opposed to what they are seeing. They are seeing the loss of spending power because they can't afford the price of gas per gallon. They are seeing the challenges of experiencing and achieving the American dream because they simply can't afford a down payment on a house. We can do better for the American people. This is not about Republicans, not even about Democrats. It's about our neighbors, the American people. Mr. President, we ask you to do a better job.
Thank you. We have time for a couple of questions. When you said we are prepared, what are you referring to?
For a cyber attack.
For a cyber attack. Critical infrastructure. I know I'm not one of those who sits on the committee. Rob, can you answer that question? Well, I don't know that I can answer whether we are prepared.
I mean, we are better prepared than we have been in the past, but we're not well prepared. And you may know there's legislation currently pending on the floor of the Senate. It combines 3 different bills to harden our ability to respond to cyber attacks in critical infrastructure, governmental side, as well as in the private sector side. And it would help with regard to a colonial pipeline type situation. So we need to do more. We have legislation to do that. It's bipartisan. It's come through the Homeland Security Committee. And my hope is we can enact that in the next couple of weeks, particularly with this looming threat. The possibility that Russia could make a huge mistake and actually invade Ukraine again, and that sanctions would then be put in place, which I strongly support, and those sanctions need to be devastating, and then cyber attacks could even be increased. I will say, though, that it's already happening. We know that Russian-backed groups were responsible for Colonial Pipeline, as an example. We know that Russian-backed groups are today attacking Ukraine consistently, and there were attacks yesterday on governmental websites, as an example. So it's already happening, the so-called hybrid war.
I'll just, from my perspective, be a little more direct on that. I don't think we're ready. I don't think we're ready. And we need to be ready. And then the other issue that Putin uses as a weapon, which we're all very familiar with, is energy. And that's, again, why this challenge that we have before us with regard to an aggressive authoritarian who uses energy as a weapon, and we're unilaterally disarming in the energy realm. Again, it makes no sense whatsoever. One of the best ways we can thwart Putin's use of energy as a weapon against our NATO allies is actually produce more energy that we can supply to them. Everybody agrees with that, except for a few far-left individuals in the White House who somehow came in and won the debate about let's unilaterally disarm on American energy. Last week, I raised this issue with the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, the National Security Advisor. What are you guys doing? What are you doing? Why would we unilaterally disarm the production of American energy? It doesn't help the environment. It only empowers our adversaries. They don't have a good question. I would love it if you guys could ask them that more, because it makes no sense.
Senator Crapo.
Yep.
Do you have any concern that the hold-up of Federal Reserve nominees could affect the way the Fed tackles inflation?
No, I've heard that argument put out. The fact is the Fed is fully operational right now. The fact, they've already shown that they have the capacity to deal with these issues. And we have really serious issues with some of the nominees that have been put forward that need to be vetted.
On the Fed's inflation approach, do you think it's aggressive enough what they've said so far they intend to do this year?
I think it's helpful. I'm not sure I can tell you that it's enough. But it's unfortunate that we are in a position that we have to rely on the Fed and the utilization of interest rates, frankly, to deal with this crisis. The better way to deal with the crisis, in addition to the Fed's help in terms of an emergency response, is for us to deal with some of these supply and demand issues that we've talked about here as well. So that really, the message needs to be, yes, the Fed's operational, and yes, we need the Fed's help right now. But that is not the panacea to the solution to this issue. The solution to this issue is to deal with the unbelievable demand pressures that this administration is putting on in terms of the reckless spending that they are engaging in, and to deal with the damage to our supply chains and to our supply side of our economy, and help us get back into the game.
Mike, I'm going to make one comment on that. I think it will actually be unhelpful if somehow in the next few months or weeks that the Federal Reserve has governors who are confirmed, and there's a big debate, there's a number of them up right now, governors who are confirmed who have said that they believe the Fed's mandate extends beyond the statutory mandate given to them by Congress, which is focused on price stability and employment. The Fed's mandate from the United States Congress has nothing to do with choking energy investment to energy companies, production of energy, climate change. Has nothing to do with that. And it gets a lot more dangerous for the independence of the Fed, but for inflation, if Fed governors are going to come on the board of the Fed thinking they have that mandate to further negatively impact energy markets, that will not help inflation at all.
Before you go, we're going to go here, but let me just say one more thing. You've prompted a thought. Does everybody in here remember Operation Choke Point? A few years back under the Obama administration, when their goal was to utilize our our financial sector regulators to choke off so-called unacceptable industries from access to financing. That's what we're talking about right now. The battle over the Fed nominees right now is a battle over whether we want to introduce choke point politics into the Federal Reserve.
And I'll say again, the Federal Reserve can operate, it is operating, and there is no threat from that. The threat comes from the changes to the Federal Reserve that the president is proposing with his new nominees. Yes.
Do you guys see potentially pausing the gas tax as a way to help with some of this inflation, to ease some of it?
Well, I'd say that each member of the Republican caucus probably could respond to that on their own. I don't know that there's a unanimous feeling, but my response is that trying to eliminate the gas tax is basically a gimmick. The price of gas is $1 higher. If you eliminated the gas tax, you would reduce 18 cents of that dollar, so there would be a step there. But what you would create is a greater amount of debt in the United States and a greater inability for us to finance our infrastructure. And financing our infrastructure is critical. Infrastructure spending is counter-inflationary. It is supply-side spending. And so they're going at the ability to finance the very kind of supply-side spending that could be helpful. So I personally think it's a bad idea, but I also think, frankly, it's just a gimmick.
Can I add to that? It's just, look at the context in which that bill has come up. Look at who introduced it. 4 very vulnerable U.S. senators who are all up for election right now. Why are they doing that? Because they're going home, like all of us, and they're hearing about the high costs of energy. They're hearing that. We're all hearing that. The way to deal with it is to support American energy production. They don't want to do that. The far left doesn't like that. This White House doesn't like that. So here's what they do. They show the bill they introduced and said, here's my plan. I'm really serious about this. It's a gimmick. It's political window dressing. That's all it is. And the notion that somehow that's going to fix it, fixing the energy costs, as many said here, these are self-inflicted wounds. We know it. We've seen it. And that is just political window dressing from some vulnerable U.S. senators who want to have something to cling to. But what they should cling to is convincing the White House to support American energy production. That's what they need to do.
Agreed. We have time for just one more question. We've got votes underway right now, so.
I was just wondering, do you think that the CHIPS Act will be able to address inflation? The White House has been saying that this will address inflation, especially with cars and other products.
I definitely believe the CHIPS Act is needed. We need to get much more aggressively back in the game in our semiconductor production in the United States. And I do believe it would be a helpful step in terms of dealing with the issues we've raised today. It's not, again, the only step, but it's in that sector of our economy, which is critical. There are semiconductors in everything, almost everything that Americans use. We need to be back in the game, and we need to be aggressively pushing for that. So yes, I think it's a good step. It's also one where we do have bipartisan support, and so I hope that we'll be able to get that enacted into law soon.
Really quickly, the Biden HHS has asked for $30 billion more for COVID relief. Do you think that's acceptable at this point?
I certainly don't, for a couple of reasons. The Biden administration continued, even though Build Back Better did not get the sufficient votes to move on the floor, the reports that I'm reading from all of you say that they're just trying to break it down into pieces now so that they can figure out how to just drill down harder and harder on the spending. And I believe that we have put so much money into this that the effort to continue drilling down on increased spending is not the appropriate response. And I want to conclude by reading the exact words of Larry Summers, which have been referenced by a number of my colleagues here today. This is what he said when we were debating the passage of ARPA, the $1.9 trillion COVID spending bill, so-called COVID spending bill, that was put forward. And these are his words. It is the least responsible macroeconomic policy we have had in the last 40 years. He followed that up in February of 2021 in a Washington Post op-ed, and again, quoting him, there is a chance that macroeconomic stimulus on a scale closer to World War II than normal recession levels will set off inflationary pressures of a kind we have not seen in a generation. Now, how prescient was that? That's what we're talking about. And your question related to an effort to peel a piece of that off and start going at it again because they couldn't get the entire reckless spending bill in the last effort. Thank you all very much.